On his way home from work, a black mechanic comes across a woman lying unconscious in the snow after an accident. Without hesitation, he rushes her to the nearest hospital. Unfortunately, the hospital is experiencing a power outage, leaving critical medical equipment unusable. In the urgency of the moment, he doesn't think twice, using his skills to help the doctors restore power just in time to save her life. Little does he know, the woman whose life he just saved is no ordinary stranger. And this fateful encounter is about to change his life forever. The snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, swallowing the dim glow of the streetlights along the quiet roads of Iron Ridge, Montana. The small mountain town had always been at the mercy of winter's brutal grip, but tonight was different. The forecast had warned of an unforgiving blizzard, the kind that could bury entire roads, freeze engines solid, and turn even the shortest drive into a battle for survival. But for Marcus Reed, a man who had spent his entire life pushing through storms, both the literal and the metaphorical, this was just another night. The worn-out garage where Marcus worked stood at the edge of town, its metal walls rattling against the howling wind. Inside, beneath the dull fluorescent lights, he wiped the grease from his hands and let out a breath, watching it curl into the cold air. The job was done. The snowplow from Cedar Peak Resort, the only thing keeping the main road from completely shutting down, had been repaired. He should have been relieved, maybe even proud, but there was no time to bask in accomplishment. His mother was waiting at home, and he still had to navigate the treacherous roads back through the valley. Pulling his thick, patched-up coat around him, Marcus grabbed his keys and stepped outside, bracing against the frigid wind that sliced through him like a blade. His old Chevy pickup, a vehicle that had seen better days, groaned as he started the engine. He knew every inch of this road, every turn, every patch of ice where cars had skidded off in past winters, but that didn't make the drive any less dangerous. As he made his way down the winding mountain pass, the snowfall grew heavier, hammering against the windshield and reducing his visibility to just a few feet ahead. He gripped the wheel tighter, his muscles tensed. The world outside was a void of white, the road barely distinguishable from the sky. He turned up the heat, but it did little to fight off the creeping cold that settled deep in his bones. Then, through the swirling snow, a faint flickering light caught his attention. Hazard lights, barely visible, blinking weakly on the side of the road. His chest tightened. No one should be out here in this storm. Slowing down, he inched closer until the shape of a luxury SUV emerged from the whiteness, half buried in a drift near the edge of a steep drop. Who the hell was crazy enough to be driving this high up in weather like this? Marcus pulled over, his tires crunching against the frozen ground. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. The SUV's front end was crushed against a tree, its rear tilted dangerously toward the ledge. The driver's side window was coated in a thick layer of frost, but as he got closer, he could just barely make out the shape of a woman slumped over the wheel, motionless. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Shit. He tried the door, frozen shut. "Hey, can you hear me?" He pounded on the glass, but the woman didn't move. Her breath had fogged up part of the windshield, a sign that she was at least still alive, but that wouldn't last long in this cold. Marcus rushed back to his truck, grabbed a wrench from his toolbox and swung it hard against the window. The glass shattered into tiny shards, a gust of icy air rushing into the cabin. Reaching in, he unlocked the door and carefully pulled the woman out, his hands rough but careful against her freezing skin. The moment her body left the seat, the SUV groaned, the metal shifting, and then, without warning, it began to slide. Marcus barely had time to react. Clutching the woman against his chest, he threw himself backward into the snow, just as the vehicle lurched over the edge, disappearing into the darkness below. The screeching sound of metal twisting and snapping echoed through the canyon. Then silence. Just the howling wind and the frantic beat of his own heart. His breath came in ragged gasps. The woman in his arms was ice cold, her lips tinged blue. He could feel the faint rise and fall of her chest, but she was barely breathing. He had to get her warm. Now, struggling to his feet, he carried her toward his truck, fighting against the wind. He threw open the passenger door and eased her inside, wrapping his heavy coat around her before cranking the heat up as high as it would go. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes as he turned to check his phone. No signal. "Damn it," he muttered. There was no time to waste. The closest hospital was 20 miles away, through roads that were barely drivable. But sitting here waiting for a rescue that might never come wasn't an option. He glanced at the woman, her face pale and delicate, her dark hair damp from the melting snow. Who was she? What was she doing out here alone? Marcus shoved the truck into gear and hit the gas, tires skidding as he sped off into the storm. The truck tore through the blizzard, its tires slipping over patches of black ice as Marcus gritted his teeth, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The heater roared at full blast, but the cold still clawed at his skin, seeping through every layer of clothing. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the sound of the storm raging outside. He glanced at the woman beside him, her head tilted weakly against the seat, her breath barely visible in the faint glow of the dash. She was alive. But for how much longer? Hang in there, he muttered, not sure if he was talking to her or himself. His foot pressed harder against the gas. The drive to St. Helena's Hospital was 20 miles of twisting, ice-covered roads, barely maintained even in the best weather. Tonight they were a death trap. Snow piled high on either side, the headlights barely piercing through the storm. His wipers fought a losing battle against the frost forming over the glass, and every gust of wind threatened to shove the truck into the ravine below. One wrong move, one skid too far, and they'd both end up like the SUV, gone, swallowed by the abyss. The woman stirred slightly, a faint sound escaping her lips. Marcus risked another glance. Her eyes fluttered open for the briefest second, unfocused, dazed. Where? Her voice was nothing more than a whisper. You were in an accident, Marcus said, keeping his eyes on the road. I'm taking you to the hospital. She shivered violently, her body curling in on itself despite the thick coat he had wrapped around her. She was still too cold. Hypothermia was sinking in fast. Marcus reached over and adjusted the vents, aiming the heat directly at her. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but before the words could come, her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the seat again. Marcus cursed under his breath. He didn't know who she was or how she had ended up in the middle of the storm alone, but none of that mattered right now. Keeping her alive did. The truck hit a rough patch, jerking violently to the side. Marcus gritted his teeth, wrestling the wheel back under control. His heart pounded against his ribs. Come on, he muttered, coaxing the vehicle forward, ignoring the way his hands trembled from the cold and the tension gripping his body. Through the windshield, a set of headlights flashed in the distance. A road sign, half buried in snow, marked the final turn toward the hospital. Relief surged through him, but it was short-lived. The moment he pressed the brakes, the truck skidded. Everything happened too fast. The tires lost traction. The world spun sideways. The back of the truck fishtailed wildly, swinging toward the edge of the road. Marcus instinctively countersteered, yanking the wheel hard, trying to regain control, but the ice had other plans. For a brief, stomach-dropping second, he felt the wheels leave the ground. The truck lurched dangerously toward the ravine. Marcus slammed the gear shift down, trying to throw the weight forward. The engine roared in protest. Snow and ice sprayed in every direction as the truck fought to grip the road. Then, finally, traction. The tires bit into the frozen ground, and with a final jolt, the truck snapped back onto the path. Marcus exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Too damn close. His hands trembled against the wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs. One more second, that was all it would have taken for them to go over. But there was no time to dwell on it. Ahead, the hospital's lights, dim and flickering through the storm, came into view, a beacon of salvation. Marcus pressed the gas one last time, pushing the battered truck forward. As he rolled into the emergency bay, the tires let out a final exhausted screech against the frozen pavement. He barely threw the gear into park before jumping out into the cold, yanking the door open and gathering the woman into his arms. "Help!" his voice cut through the storm. "She needs help." A group of nurses and paramedics burst through the emergency doors, their faces grim as they rushed toward him with a gurney. Marcus lowered the woman carefully, his breath fogging up the air around him as his body screamed from exhaustion. "She was out in the storm," he explained quickly, his voice hoarse. "Unconscious when I found her. I don't know how long." The lead nurse, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, nodded briskly. "We've got her. Let's move." Marcus stood frozen as they wheeled the woman inside, disappearing beyond the sliding doors. His arm still tingled where he had held her, her weight lingering like a ghost. He let out a breath, his chest heavy, his muscles finally catching up to the adrenaline burning through his veins. And then, the lights in the hospital flickered once, then again. And then, suddenly, everything went dark. The hospital plunged into darkness, a suffocating silence followed, broken only by the muffled gasp of patients and the hurried footsteps of nurses scrambling for flashlights. The storm still howled outside, rattling the windows, pressing its weight against the fragile security of the building. Marcus stood frozen in the emergency bay, his breath visible in the cold air as reality set in. The power was out. A sharp curse echoed from down the hall. Somewhere near the nurses' station, the emergency backup lights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows against the sterile white walls. But it wasn't enough. The overhead fluorescence remained dark. Machines beeped erratically, some going completely silent. The entire hospital was running on the last dregs of power, and by the panicked voices filling the hall, it wasn't going to last. Marcus turned back toward the emergency room doors. The woman, Victoria, had already been rushed inside, her unconscious body disappearing behind swinging double doors. His chest was still tight, his hands still raw from the cold, but he forced himself to move. She needed help, and now so did everyone else. A nurse rushed past him, nearly colliding with a security guard who was sprinting in the opposite direction. "What the hell happened?" Marcus demanded, catching the guard by the arm. "Storm knocked out the main power," the man said, his breath coming fast. "Generator should have kicked in, but it's been faulty for weeks. Administration kept pushing off repairs, said there wasn't enough funding to replace it." Marcus's jaw clenched. Typical. Another institution run by people who didn't care until it was too late. The guard was already moving again, but Marcus wasn't done. "How long do we have before things get critical?" The man hesitated, then shook his head. "Minutes, maybe less. ICU and ER depend on that power. If we don't get it back up—" His voice trailed off, but Marcus didn't need him to finish. His mind was already racing. He had spent his entire life fixing broken things. Engines, generators, transmissions held together by nothing more than stubbornness and the will to keep moving. A hospital generator was bigger, more complicated, but the principles were the same. "I can fix it," Marcus said before he could think better of it. The guard blinked. "What?" I said, "I can fix it." Marcus wiped the melted snow from his forehead. "Just tell me where it is." The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward Marcus's worn-out work boots, the grease still smudged on his jacket. There it was. That flicker of doubt, of judgment. The unspoken assumption that someone like Marcus, a black mechanic in a hospital full of well-dressed doctors, didn't belong here. Marcus had seen that look 100 times before. He held the man's gaze, unflinching. "You can waste time asking for my credentials," he said, voice sharp. "Or you can take me to the damned generator before people start dying." A tense moment passed, then the guard nodded. "Follow me." Marcus didn't wait for permission. They moved quickly, cutting through the chaos in the hallways. Nurses hurried between patients, their flashlights flickering over pale faces and IV drips. Somewhere, a ventilator alarm screeched, a chilling reminder of just how little time they had left. The generator room was in the basement, a cramped space that reeked of mildew and burnt metal. The second Marcus stepped inside, he knew it was bad. The generator was ancient, its wiring tangled like a nest of dying veins. A section of the casing was scorched, the telltale sign of an electrical short. The storm had likely overloaded the circuits, frying half the system. No quick fix, no easy answer. The guard shifted beside him. "Can you—" "Shut up," Marcus muttered, already moving. He pulled off his gloves, flexing his fingers despite the numbness biting at them. He needed to think. No spare parts, no time to order new ones. His eyes flicked over the mess of wiring, calculating, adjusting. He could reroute the power, bypass the fried circuits, but that wouldn't hold for long. He needed something, a capacitor, a fresh set of relays, anything to keep the current stable. And then it hit him. His truck. The thought was so ridiculous, so desperate, that for a second he almost dismissed it. But it was the only option. His truck had been rebuilt piece by piece, every part hand-picked, replaced, modified to keep it running despite every damn thing working against it. And right now, that truck was the difference between life and death. Marcus whirled around. I need 10 minutes. If anyone can keep those patients alive until then, tell them to do it. The guard stared at him like he was insane, but Marcus was already running. The storm hit him like a wall the second he burst through the emergency exit. Snow pelted his face, ice cracking beneath his boots as he sprinted toward his truck. His hands shook as he yanked open the hood, breath coming in short, hard gasps. He reached for his tools, the same set he had used to fix the snowplow hours ago. The same tools he had spent years collecting, salvaging, repairing, like his life depended on it. Tonight other lives did. The wind screamed around him, numbing his fingers as he worked, unbolting components with a speed born from necessity. The battery, the fuses, a salvaged regulator he had rigged last winter when the alternator had failed. He grabbed what he needed, shoved the hood down, and ran back toward the building. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he didn't stop. Back in the generator room, he fell to his knees, fingers working faster than his mind could process. The hospital didn't need perfection, they needed power. The world narrowed to nothing but circuits and voltage, the familiar rhythm of problem-solving overriding everything else. One wrong connection could fry the entire system, but Marcus had never been the type to let fear dictate his actions. One more wire, one last adjustment. He exhaled sharply. Try it now. The guard hesitated, then pressed the switch. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum, a flicker, a spark, and then the lights roared back to life. Upstairs, voices shouted in relief. Machines beeped, ventilators kicked back on, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the storm wasn't the only thing filling the air. Marcus sat back, hands coated in grease, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Beside him, the guard let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. You just saved this entire damn hospital. But Marcus wasn't listening. His head tilted toward the doorway where a nurse stood, her face pale. It's the woman you brought in, she said, voice tight. She's waking up. Marcus pushed himself up, his muscles aching from exhaustion, his hands still trembling from the cold and the adrenaline burning through his veins. The hospital was alive again, the hum of the generators steady, the overhead lights casting a stark glow over the chaos of the ER. But his focus had already shifted. The woman, Victoria, was waking up. He followed the nurse down the hallway, his boots heavy against the tile. The storm still raged outside, wind rattling the windows, but inside the hospital had settled into a fragile order. Doctors moved with renewed urgency, machines beeped in steady rhythm, and the weight that had pressed down on Marcus since the moment he'd found her in that wreck was finally beginning to lift. Victoria was in a private room near the ICU, her body wrapped in thick blankets, an IV line running to her arm. She looked different now, not just because the color was returning to her face, but because she wasn't just an unconscious body in the snow anymore. She was awake. She was real. The moment he stepped inside, her eyes flickered toward him, still hazy, still trying to make sense of where she was. He wasn't sure if she recognized him, but when she tried to sit up, a sharp breath of pain escaped her lips, and he instinctively moved forward. Easy, he said, his voice rough. You're in the hospital. She blinked at him, her forehead creasing slightly. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. I found you in your car, Marcus said simply. You were half frozen. I got you here before it was too late. For a second there was only silence. Her gaze flickered down to his hands, still streaked with grease and dried blood, then back to his face. Something shifted in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe disbelief. Then she exhaled, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. The SUV, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Gone, Marcus confirmed. Went over the edge right after I pulled you out. Whatever was inside, it's lost. She closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, something had changed, a flicker of panic. A sudden tension in the way her hands curled against the sheets. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Marcus frowned. What? She struggled against the blankets, wincing as she tried to sit up. The bag, she rasped. There was a leather case. Marcus reached into his coat before she could finish. The leather was still cold against his fingers as he pulled it out, the snow melt staining the edges. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't needed to. But now, watching the way her breathing hitched at the sight of it, the way her fingers trembled when she reached for it, he knew whatever was inside mattered. She clutched the bag to her chest, her lips parted slightly as if she were trying to form words but couldn't. Marcus watched her carefully. She wasn't just relieved, she was afraid. "What's in there?" he asked, his voice steady. Victoria swallowed hard, still gripping the bag. She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to decide something. He recognized that look. He'd seen it 100 times before, people trying to decide whether to trust him, whether he was worth believing, whether he was worth anything at all. She took a slow breath. Evidence. Marcus's brow furrowed. Evidence of what? Her throat worked as she swallowed again. Fraud. Embezzlement. My company, Langford Holdings, it's being torn apart from the inside. Her voice was steadier now, but there was an edge to it. Board members are setting me up. If they succeed, hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. People who depend on their paychecks, their benefits, people with families. This, she motioned weakly to the bag, is the only thing that can stop them. Marcus exhaled slowly. That was why she'd been on that mountain road, alone, in the middle of a storm, risking her own life to protect the people who worked for her. He leaned against the chair by her bed, his arms crossing over his chest. So that's why you were out there. Victoria gave a slight, almost bitter laugh. Yeah, stupid, right? Not stupid, Marcus said, shaking his head. Just dangerous. She let out a shaky breath, fingers still curled tightly around the case. I was supposed to meet my father tonight. He was waiting for me at our family home, but I never made it. Marcus was already nodding before she could finish, and now, with the roads closed, he's stuck. She hesitated, then nodded. I've been trying to reach him, but my phone... No signal, Marcus finished for her. Yeah, I know. The realization settled between them like a weight. The hospital had power now, but outside the storm was still raging. The roads were getting worse by the minute. Victoria's father wasn't coming. She let her head fall back against the pillow, frustration clear in the tension of her jaw. The meeting with my lawyers is tomorrow morning, she murmured. If he doesn't get this in time... Marcus sat still, staring at the case in her hands. He didn't owe this woman anything. He didn't know her. She was a CEO, the kind of person who usually wouldn't give someone like him a second glance. But she wasn't like the others. She wasn't sitting in some high-rise office, untouched by the fallout. She was in the middle of it, risking everything. And he knew what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. Slowly he leaned forward. I'll take it. Victoria's eyes snapped toward him. What? I'll take the evidence to your father. His voice was calm, steady. I know these roads. I can get there before morning. Her expression shifted, torn between disbelief and something else. Fear. No, that's insane. You barely made it here alive. I can't... People's jobs are on the line, right? Marcus cut in. Hundreds of them. She hesitated. If you don't want me to go, say so, Marcus continued, meeting her gaze. But if you do, if you think this is worth the risk, give me something to prove to your father that I'm telling the truth. Victoria stared at him. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the hospital around them, the distant beeping of machines, the muffled howl of the wind against the windows. Then, slowly, she unfastened the watch from her wrist. It was expansive, gold, sleek, engraved with the initials VL. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. His estate is past the ridge, she said softly. Langford Manor. If you can get there by sunrise, he'll know what to do. Marcus glanced down at the watch, feeling the weight of it against his skin. Then he took the case, tucked it under his arm, and stood. I'll make it. Marcus stepped out into the storm, his boots sinking into the fresh snow as the wind howled around him. The hospital's lights flickered behind him, a stark contrast to the darkness that swallowed the road ahead. The world was white and merciless, stretching endlessly into the unknown. He tightened his grip on the leather case, feeling the weight of Victoria's watch pressing into his palm. He had one job: get this evidence to Harold Langford before sunrise. The truck's engine sputtered as he turned the key, the cold having seeped into every inch of metal. For a moment he thought it wouldn't start, but then, with a reluctant roar, the engine came to life. Marcus exhaled, adjusted the vents, and gripped the wheel. Then he drove straight into the storm. The blizzard was relentless. Visibility was near zero. The snow came down in thick waves, swallowing the road, the trees, the sky itself. The wipers struggled to keep up, streaking ice across the windshield, and every few minutes Marcus had to lean forward, squinting against the swirling white abyss. The truck skidded more than once, the tires slipping over hidden patches of ice. He fought the wheel, his heart hammering as the back end of the truck fishtailed toward the drop-off on his right. One mistake, one wrong move, and he'd vanish into the ravine below. No one would ever find him. The thought gnawed at him, but he shoved it aside. He'd made a promise, and if he had survived everything life had thrown at him up until now, he sure as hell wasn't about to let a little snow take him out. A particularly strong gust slammed into the side of the truck, nearly pushing him off course. Marcus gritted his teeth and pressed forward, his fingers aching from how tightly he was gripping the wheel. It felt like hours before he finally spotted a road marker peeking out from beneath the snow, barely visible in the dim glow of his headlights. He checked the map in his head, 10 more miles to the Langford estate. But the worst was yet to come. The bridge over Black Hollow Pass was barely holding together. Marcus didn't realize the extent of the damage until he was already on it. The planks creaked beneath his tires, the rusted metal beams groaning under the weight of his truck. He eased off the gas, muscles tensed. Snow piled high along the edges, threatening to collapse onto the frozen river below. This thing could go at any second. A deep crack echoed through the air. Shit. Marcus didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward just as the bridge gave out behind him. The rear wheels caught on the last remaining plank, and for a terrifying second he thought he wouldn't make it. But then the truck lurched free, tires gripping solid ground. Marcus let out a shaky breath, glancing in the rear-view mirror just in time to see the last remnants of the bridge crumble into the abyss. There was no turning back now. By the time he reached Langford Manor, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a faint silver glow over the endless fields of white. The estate was massive, a towering mansion surrounded by iron gates and security cameras. It looked like something out of another world, a world Marcus had never belonged to. For a moment he hesitated. Would they even open the door for someone like him? But then he thought of Victoria, of the desperation in her eyes, the weight of her father's watch in his pocket. He squared his shoulders, gripped the case tighter, and stepped forward. The guard at the gate didn't even try to hide his skepticism. "You lost?" the man drawled, eyeing Marcus's grease-stained jacket, his work boots still covered in snow. Marcus was used to this, the doubt, the dismissal. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out the watch, and held it up. "Victoria Langford sent me." The guard's expression shifted immediately. He turned, murmured something into his radio, then nodded. "Come with me." Harold Langford was waiting in his study, dressed in an expensive robe, a fire crackling in the grand stone fireplace. He was older, his hair silver at the temples, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in his gaze, the kind of man who had built an empire and wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. Marcus stepped forward and set the case on the desk. "Victoria was in an accident," he said, his voice steady. "She's alive. She told me to bring this to you." Harold's brows furrowed, his fingers tightening around the watch Marcus had handed him. "She's at St. Helena's," Marcus continued. "I got her there just before the power went out. She was carrying this when I found her." Harold slowly opened the case. For a moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled, his shoulders sagging in something that looked almost like relief. "You have no idea what you've just done," he murmured, flipping through the documents. Marcus crossed his arms. "I know enough." Harold looked up, studying him. "You risked your life to bring this here." Marcus shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. A slow smile tugged at the older man's lips. He reached for a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, and began writing. Marcus already knew what was coming. Harold tore the check free and extended it toward him. "Consider this a small token of appreciation." Marcus glanced at the number. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. But he didn't take it. Instead, he shook his head. "I don't want a handout." Harold's brows lifted slightly. "Then what do you want?" Marcus hesitated. Then, slowly, he said, "I want to build something. A place where people like me, people who didn't have a damn thing growing up, can learn a trade, get a real shot at life." He exhaled, meeting Harold's gaze. That money could do a lot of good in Iron Ridge. For a long moment Harold said nothing. Then, to Marcus's surprise, he smiled. "I like you, Mr. Reed." He set the check down. "Use it well." The months that followed were a whirlwind. The case Victoria had risked everything for blew open a corporate scandal, exposing the board members who had been orchestrating the fraud. Langford Holdings was saved, and so were the jobs of the hundreds of employees who had been unknowingly standing at the edge of disaster. Victoria, stronger than ever, took back control of her company with a ruthlessness that made headlines. But for Marcus, the real work had just begun. With Harold Langford's backing, his small garage transformed into something much bigger. The grant he had negotiated wasn't just a check, it was an investment. Equipment was brought in, renovations began, and for the first time in his life, Marcus found himself at the helm of something that wasn't just about survival. It was about building. People came, young men and women who had never been given a shot, who had been told they'd never be more than their circumstances. Marcus saw himself in them, and just like that, Iron Ridge had something it had never had before, a future. And then one crisp winter morning, Victoria returned. 1 year later, the Reed Automotive Training Center stood where Marcus's old garage had once been. The place was bigger now, state-of-the-art equipment, a full staff, a line of eager young students ready to learn. Marcus stood outside, watching as a group of teenagers worked together under the hood of an old car, their laughter cutting through the crisp morning air. A familiar black SUV pulled up, and Victoria stepped out, her father beside her. "I see you've been busy," she said, smiling. Marcus smirked, wiping the grease from his hands. "You could say that." Harold handed him a polished wooden box, a small gift for the shop. Marcus opened it and let out a low whistle. Top-of-the-line tools, the kind he never could have afforded on his own. For a second, he didn't know what to say. Then, finally, he nodded. "Thanks." Victoria crossed her arms. "So, what's next?" Marcus looked around, the weight of everything hitting him at once. A year ago he had been a mechanic barely scraping by. Now he was running something that actually mattered. He met her gaze and grinned. "Now?" He glanced toward the students. "Now we build." The months that followed were a whirlwind. The case Victoria had risked everything for blew open a corporate scandal, exposing the board members who had been orchestrating the fraud. Langford Holdings was saved, and so were the jobs of the hundreds of employees who had been unknowingly standing at the edge of disaster. Victoria, stronger than ever, took back control of her company with a ruthlessness that made headlines. But for Marcus, the real work had just begun. With Harold Langford's backing, his small garage transformed into something much bigger. The grant he had negotiated wasn't just a check, it was an investment. Equipment was brought in, renovations began, and for the first time in his life, Marcus found himself at the helm of something that wasn't just about survival. It was about building. People came, young men and women who had never been given a shot, who had been told they'd never be more than their circumstances. Marcus saw himself in them. And just like that, Iron Ridge had something it had never had before, a future. And then, one crisp winter morning, Victoria returned. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.